In a seat that would be recommended. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Eric Kahn, and I want to welcome you to the new SCI-Arc. Our lecture series has gotten off to a rather bumpy start, and we're going to get on schedule tonight with Michele Saee. And the structure of the lecture has changed slightly. Michele will be speaking about a sort of collage of his own work and a project that was developed by Ann Troutman and Michele, being taught in the second-year studio. I'd like to also thank the lecture committee, of which I was the advisor, for their help in putting together what was shaping up to be a great lecture series. It's sort of gotten pushed around, and hopefully we can get people like Avital Ronell to reschedule, and look forward to other people such as Sanford Quinter to come talk about the Metropolis. It's my pleasure to introduce Michele tonight. He's someone I've known and grown as an architect with over the last 8 years. We had COA actually was neighbors for 2 or 3 years at the beginning of our career. And through the trials and tribulations of trying to get work and understand the city and teach at the same time and get things to become clear and cohesive, he was always an inspiration to me. Rather than going through a list of his works, I just wanted to make this short and turn over the podium to Michele Saee. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. I would like to thank the lecture committee, most of all Eric, Rosemary, Raven, Lisin Chia, Blaine Imada, Max Dimling, Hien No, Daniel Ha, Flora Vara, for their effort to put these lectures together. And I'm very honored to be part of this event tonight. I want to apologize for not having Ann Troutman here. We were going to treat you for a double feature, but you have to bear with us. And but I'm going to try to touch the subjects that we originally intended for this lecture series at part of my talk about my experience and my work. I also would like to thank Tamara Falconer and Julie Broad, Rachel Allen, and Greg Slowick for their great effort to set the slides and do all the other work that needed to be done. I really appreciate that. I'm going to take a while I get used to this light, which is hitting me in my eyes, but the process of making architecture seems to me the most important part of the whole thing. I see the process even more important and more essential than the end product. In that process, I see myself dealing with various things, of which is the people I work with, which are very dear to me, and in that process we get closer and closer to each other and work towards learning and making. I don't see architecture as a product of one person. I never had that idea from the very beginning. I always saw architecture as a product of a collaboration between people who think about it, make it, develop it, and in that process all these people come together and bond together and make something which is the expression of their unity to a certain extent, and their understanding of each other and their lives. I want to read a letter that Eduardo Chillida, a Catalan sculptor, wrote to Peter Selt in 1984, which sort of it has affected my work and my way of thinking considerably. That's how it goes. From space with its brother time, under the pressing heaviness of gravity, feeling material as if it were a slower space, I ponder with amazement over my ignorance. I believe I must venture into making what I know not, seek to visualize where I do not see, strive to recognize what I cannot discern, attempt to identify within the realm of the unknown. Along the unfolding of these processes, which resemble those of creation in science, many hardships arise. We have the hands of yesterday, but we lack those of tomorrow. I have a conception of the work before I undertake it, but I do not know, nor do I want to know at the moment of creation, how will it be. I possess many facts about the work in which I am living, but I will not allow this knowledge to inhibit my freedom nor the breath of the present. I believe works conceived a priori are born dead. Adventure, as it strikes the unknown, can at time bring forth art. It was quite interesting for me to come to know his work, which was quite by accident. A very dear friend of mine gave me a book of his work and a tape of his ideas, a film of his work and his ideas, and I found it very amazing and very, very strong in terms of I found a lot of similarities in my way of thinking and in my way of making that resembles to Chillida's ideas. The work that I'm about to show you is the product of the 7 years of making. And before everything, I want to explain where I come from and to explain how my past through where all the experiences I've gone through in one way or the other has affected my work and this experience of making. When I look back and think about coming from Iran and working here, I sometimes really feel tired even just thinking about it. Growing up in Iran and going to school of architecture in Italy and finally working in Los Angeles has given me the opportunity to, or sometimes the chance to always having to evaluate my past through life, always having to have to look back and reevaluate everything and trying to trace and in being under the pressure to look at things in a much more, trying to hold to whatever I sort of developed and try to develop it further and adapt it to the different situations at all times. For me, it has been a lifetime experience. In the last 10 years, mostly being in Los Angeles has affected me considerably. I think that learning architecture in a country like Italy and School of Architecture in Florence maybe taught me certain values about the history and the presence of space and architecture and time. And living in a city like, which I don't call city anymore, and not city like Los Angeles, taught me how to experiment and how to feel free to express myself. I don't necessarily want to concentrate on the individual projects because I see them all as a continuum. I don't necessarily want to emphasize on a certain beginning or a certain goal. I sort of would like to consider my experience in a continuum of time in between. None of my projects are, in my mind, finished. None of them have all my ideas. None of my projects, none of these projects are considered for me that I have arrived or have achieved anything. They're just expressions of my experiences and my understandings and my response to the environment, to space, to people, to materials, things I read, things I did, not necessarily exactly related to architecture, sometimes very indirect. A very good friend, which is not with us anymore, most of you might know him, Saul Golden, used to say that it gotta sing. The bloody thing gotta sing. And I always thought that was the most important thing about architecture, which the space after all the intellectual assumptions and beautiful drawings and models and concepts and developments, if it ends up as an unsuccessful space, I think it's a failure. And to make it sing requires incredible amount of work and development and growth. The formation of space is strongly related to the social structure of every society, and every spatial expression presents a certain specificity in relation to that space. Space as a material product has its own relationship with the people who have been involved in making them, and people who would be using that space. Unfortunately, I think that we have lost our contacts or relationships with the space that we're living or inhabiting. We're still living in the fantasy of, or in the memories of the certain space, and that memory is what keeps us alive or keeps us going. Where in reality, I think that the practice of architecture today is quite inhuman. and anti-human. Over 95% of the space that is being constructed or built is based on speculation and nothing else. It's based on profit and not need, and I don't think that anything can happen until we, as the future architects or designers, take a position and try to change things in the direction that we think is right for us, or right for our society or environment. When the feudalism as a system was destroyed by capitalism, it didn't happen overnight. There was a historical event. It took a long period of time, and capitalism started growing in heart of this feudalism, and eventually it changed the social structures, political structures, everything within that system, and then destroyed it. That didn't mean necessarily that agriculture has been destroyed, but it meant that the social structure and the necessities that society had before changed, and the new system was placed. The new system started to dominate that society. So when I say the city is not there anymore, or the city is, I think that the concept of the city is a historic event at this time, it doesn't mean that cities don't exist anymore. In a form, and maybe, in certain aspects, maybe they still exist, but the concept is changed. The new type of production at an international level has different needs as it did maybe 80 or 90 years ago. The new structure requires new kind of space, new kind of information, new kind of mobility of the workforce at the international level, and new kind of architecture. And therefore, I think that if we delude ourselves and imagine that still we're dealing in an environment or a condition like Los Angeles, for example, as an example, and deal with it as a city with the same needs and same structure and same social political substructure, that would be a mistake. That would be a problem. In 1977 and 78, I started working on my thesis on at the University of Florence on the urbanization in undeveloped country, and specifically in Iran, and the city of Tehran was the sort of like focus of that research. And it was then that through the research that me and my colleagues did, we realized that it's a very similar phenomenon to many other cities all over the world. Tehran is very similar to Los Angeles, is very similar to Caracas, is very similar to Kuwait, is very similar to a lot of 20th century cities, that there's no sense of hierarchy. It's absolutely stripped down to the basic structure of transportation and systems of communication. It was in that process that we realized that, or further, when I came here, I realized how close the systems are, or how, even though Tehran is a third world country version, or Tehran is a third world country version of the same city that we see in a first world country like USA. And that changed my attitude towards this environment. I wasn't going after certain aspect of the city that was gone and dead for centuries now, or decades, better said. I was thinking about the exigencies, needs of a certain program, and imply that program through the context, analysis of the area, weather, light, needs, you name it. And through that process, I would come up with the solutions that you see in these projects. And eventually, that became more and more apparent to me that the interventions needed a certain memory of the past, or a certain structure that would back up the necessity that people would have felt as if this intervention was in a city, which I don't think Los Angeles is a city. And I think that the distribution of the space in this city, is a product of the global economy, of economy at the level of international level, and is not conditioned only by the needs or necessities of the people that live here and economy of the local economy. So my reactions, all the work you see, is the product of this idea, and it's not limited to the fact that I see a certain condition isolated from the broader view of this environment. Please hold the one on your right. Yeah. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about this this project. It's an apartment building in a mid-Wilshire district, and it's a 20-unit apartment building, which was one of my very first project of this scale, and at this moment the last one. I started a series of research on the kind of building that apartment building that mostly appropriated to the Los Angeles weather and conditions, And I was confronted with the failure of the system where you would expect in a city, in an environment like Los Angeles, there would be welcoming open space, roof gardens, cross ventilation, and instead I was confronted with laws and regulations which was totally against all that, which meant that if you wanted to have cross ventilation, it would require you to get a variance. If you wanted to have an open courtyard, you had to get a variance. If you wanted to have a roof garden, you have to have a variance. If you want to have 3 side windows, then probably another one. And if it wasn't because the project scale, I would have given up much earlier. But I kept getting all those variances and fighting the city for it. The reason I'm bringing this up is sometimes it really to get a project done, it's not just your intentions, but everything has to work toward in your benefit. You have to have the right client, you have to have the right project, right part of the city, right plan checker, right contractor, right subcontractor. So it's like you take a project, you just consider building a project, and you have to, between all the governmental permits and etc., and the contractors and subcontractors, over 200 or 300 people get involved in a single project of like small scale like this. And then I realized why people buy, all these apartment buildings that I would pass by them, and I would say, who could build that? Who could actually design that? And I realized why and how it happened. It was quite a nightmare to go through this process of between 3 years of design, permits, and build of a 20-unit apartment building. A part of it was my lack of experience, and I admit it. It was the first time I was building a building of this scale. But the other part of it there is all these laws and regulations which really limits your ability of doing something that at least appropriate for this climate or for this city. Next, please. Next. So all the units are townhouses. They're 2-story townhouses, and they all have. They're like I try to divide the typology of the units in like 5 different typology, because I didn't want them all to be the same, and wherever it was possible to alter it slightly, I did so. So each one of the units is different from one another. This was, in a way, it helped the construction to a certain extent. I tried to put the bathrooms line up the bathrooms and all the kitchens for the plumbing reasons, and try to use very certain heights for the interior walls to be more cost efficient, and mostly is occupied, and right now is all occupied. And with most of the people that I talk to, their concern is about the size of the apartments, that they think still is small for the even for a 1-bedroom is small, even though it's very spacious. And that's again is part of the regulations. You're required to have certain square feet of construction on that lot and certain number of units. And if you make less units, then economically it's not feasible to even build it. And if you make the right number of units, then it would require that you make them in a certain size. So you're chasing your tail. And if you make an apartment bigger than a certain size, then you need 2 parking for each unit, so on and so forth. Next, please. Next. Next. What happened there? Yeah, this is the slide on your right is one of the interiors. On the second floor, there's a continuous skylight all through the 140 feet of the building, which lights the living room and the bedroom, which is the loft bedroom of each unit. Next, please. Next. Next, please. These are just some formal exercises for a set of a movie, certain parts and sort of fragments of the sets of a movie which was never actually used in that movie. The last minute was eliminated, but it was an interesting project because it was interesting to design something for trying to make illusion and then use it for the illusion only, and just make something, sort of fabricate something in a totally different manner that I was used to. Just basically building a very small model and just build a real scale thing from there, and then alter it and change it during the construction. Basically design, build at the same time. Next, please. The projects go through a series of changes and development, and it really the kind of involvement that we have got with the projects is sort of like on a day-to-day basis. The projects require that kind of attention, and from various standpoints, it's maybe not very economical because they require that kind of attention. But at the same time, if a project is right and it is the right client and the right time and the right group of people to work with, that's the best opportunity to take advantage of that kind of project. Anjali Mare was one of those projects. I had very good people to work with, And the projects, there were two of them happening at the same time, Angeli Mare and Ecru Marina. They were happening at the same time. And I had the opportunity to work with Richard Lundquist, as I'm sure most of you are familiar with, David Lindbergh, and that was a great experience. That alone, just designing and building models and building life-size models and looking at them, talking about them, it was quite an incredible experience. And finally, when it goes to the construction, the same thing sort of carries through. You get involved with how to build it, how to actually form these shapes, how to draw them in that scale. It's 33 feet shaped, and you want to be right if you draw it and you cut it out of 1/4-inch steel. You don't want to make that many mistakes. And working with very great craftsmen. John McCoy is a steel fabricator who I've worked with in the last 7 years. Almost all of my project has been touched by him in one way or the other. And he's a master in his trade, and he knows that material more than anybody I've met so far. He has a way of touching the steel that nobody can, or I haven't had the opportunity to meet those other people. I met McCoy through Anjali Cafe. Tom Main asked me to find a steel fabricator, so I opened the yellow pages and I called about 15 or 20 people and I sent them drawings. Most of the people I called back didn't even want to talk to me, and only he was the only person who actually returned my call, and we talked, and he asked the most clever questions I've heard about that facade. The first thing he asked me was, we wanted to build the entire facade in one piece, and he said, well, how are you going to deliver it? That's like the first question, and I said, on a big truck, He said, well, they don't make a truck that big, and even though, you have 16 feet height limit for the bridges you have to pass under, and et cetera, and we have to assemble it in that height, and so we have to make a structure first to assemble it and then put it on the truck. So he asked me the most incredible, intelligent questions that blow my mind. So the next thing I did, I got in my car and went to his shop the same day, and it was a scary experience. It's in Watts, and it was like 6 o'clock in the late afternoon. And at that time, after you have worked on steel all day, you're all dirty and so I went to his office, and he didn't even look at me, or he didn't even talk to me for like 2 hours. I was just sitting around, and he was doing things and walking around and ordering things to people to do. So finally we sat down and talked, and since then we have been working together. So it was quite an experience to meet him, and it's very rare to come across people like that. And I've been very fortunate in a lot of ways to meet people, craftsmen like that, or designers like Richard and Max and David. It's really hard for those of you who have worked with steel or know steel, it's really hard to keep 33-foot steel beam straight, and if anybody can do it, is only John McCoy. Next, please. So all the pieces were made, and we can continue, and delivered to the site and installed. We had a very good installation crew, which McCoy never installed. He'd rather not get involved with that because it requires certain expertise that he thinks, or he'd rather not deal with or not touch. Using the same method, prefabricating certain parts, just like the Ecru on Melrose. And in this building, we didn't have it. We couldn't bring the crane because of the second floor, and therefore we had to bring the things in by hand or scissor lifts or various things. When we started thinking about the Ecru in Marina del Rey, the first thing we did was take the old facade, blow it up like 4 times, and put it on the new Ecru. And the forms were so abstracted that you couldn't even recognize it. And there we realized that it didn't really matter what was the initial form, but we seeked for certain touch of human body form. We started playing with forms and shapes of Indian goddesses or human body forms, and eventually we transformed one of them into the section of the walls. The contextual relationship of the place with the marina was the construction of the boat construction, and we sort of imitated or used the same technology for forming the walls of the Ecru store. In a lot of ways looks easier than we thought, or seemed easier. We just thought that we have to just cut, 200-300 pieces of wood, same shape, and then put them together. But when you want to skin it, or put a skin on that structure, then you realize how perfect that frame has to be to be able to put that skin properly and make it look right. Unfortunately, I've lost a few children in the last depression, and Ecru Melrose is one of them, and Design Express is the other one. All the parts, all the details were thought out, designed, developed. Light fixtures, furniture, something has happened with the slides. They're not quite in the right place. Yeah, that's better. Could you stop for a second, please? This is a house that I designed for very good friends, Amy and Michael Chapman. It was a very extensive remodeling, actually. It wasn't a complete project. But one of the essential things that sort of like made me stop on this was this is the bathroom of the second floor, and the bathroom of the second floor becomes some kind of ventilation system for the entire floor. I raised the volume and sort of imitated the same system that they use in the deserts in Iran. They have this the wind towers that captures the air, and I thought that, you know, because usually bathrooms are humid because of the water and, you know, taking baths or showers, so that would give them it cools off the air, and when it circulates it can cool off the house on the second floor. It was an experiment, and I very recently talked to him, and he said that they don't use their air conditioning on the second floor, but they need to use it on the first floor. And the house is right temperature during the summer because of that wind tower. Next, please. When I'm confronted with the question, what are my influences, I really have a hard time. Stop, please. I have a very hard time answering that question because I feel like the life is all influences. We learn so much from each other and so much from things we see and we experience that really tracing those passages is almost impossible. I thought I should have an image of Anne here, even though she's not here. We have been working on the project that Eric mentioned for the last 2 years. It's a collaboration of all of us, me and Eric, and nobody can write as beautifully as what Anne wrote here. I want to read you what she wrote. Built form is a container of consciousness, an expression of its maker's awareness. It is in process, an evolving presence filtered through the perception of its maker or observer. Every moment is filled with observable detail. Individual experience, knowledge, memories guide our perception to the poetic or transformative qualities of our environment. Individual selects, filters, interprets, transforms, and finally uses information. Through seeing, the creator begins his or her creation. The way of seeing invariably shapes the invention. Architecture, a container of consciousness, a way of seeing, a measuring device, an encyclopedia, a personal history, a map of values, a technological feat. Transcend, a physical memory, a memory of the future, a means of changing the world, an individual invention. Nothing is fixed. Creates art is always evolving. Time can run backward and the universe expands in every second. The human being is equipped with a variety of perceptual abilities that enable us to experience, interpret, order the world, physically, sexually, intellectually, intuitively, instinctively, and through memory. Each one of these abilities adds to our vocabulary of experience, perception, or means of invention. Think, remember, document, and invent. The project begins by examining the role of individual perception in comprehending and interpreting the environment, using a text by Dr. Oliver Sacks, the man who mistook his wife for a hat. These case studies of perceptual disorders illustrate the vital role of individual perception in comprehending, ordering, and using the environment. In each case study, the patient's pathology evolves in a sensory perceptual loss and a unique form of compensation for that missing perception, which we might call improvisation. For example, in the first study, a musician lacks the ability to visually recognize objects in common use. Though he can describe them schematically, i.e., glove is a container with 5 protrusions, part of what he lacks is the ability to relate objects to himself, and though cannot know them through use. However, as long as he can hear, sing, or hum, he is able to make sense of the world around him so that he can function. The genius of his disease, is that his ability to visually recognize or sight familiar faces, objects, has resulted in a perhaps absurd but poetic intensification of senses and development of alternate ways of ordering his experience. Understood analytically, this study suggests that the use and the development of other physical systems or senses may inspire the invention of unique architectural space, and that the technique of improvisation may expand our vocabulary of use, form, and material, as well as a spatial perception, identifying architecture as a constantly changing process, leading it far beyond the static limits of conceptual and formal problem solving. Next. These are, go slower on these please, like every 10 seconds. These are projects that were built by students during that experiment we did. It has been quite a learning process for me personally to experiment and do these projects. I've learned a great deal from my students, and unfortunately I haven't been able to photograph or document all the projects. We were limited to just very few slides that we got from the students at the end of the course. This is an insert of the Keisler's project, which I thought was related to the project. The objective of the project was mainly to sensitize the designer or the inventor towards the things around him and give him the ability to trust his intuition most of all, and build, based on that intuitive ability, design and build and analyze. Slide on the right is Keisler again. it was very painful at certain times to see the students go through the process. We are all mostly used to being told what to do, and in every step. And when you are confronted with a situation when you're told to do whatever you want, it becomes really difficult to respond. And I felt the same way when I got my first project. Actually, I got like 3 or 4 projects at the same time, and I was very happy. And my girlfriend told me, well, you have to design them and build them and construct them. I mean, this is just the beginning of it. Getting the projects is the easiest part. I didn't know that then. These are some of my experimentations with forms and shapes based on various experiences. This is like a continuous project I've been dealing with the last 4 years. The projects of that experiment has influenced me a great deal. So I started using that notion of intuitive design and trusting my intuition and working with the project in the same manner as we did with the Dr. P project, and designed, this is my latest project that is a dental office. And all the parts again was built at McCoy's and were delivered there, installed. And it was really a challenge how to make that experience any easier than it is. And so I designed the entire building based on the relationship of these planes within the walls and the ceiling. So when you're laying down on that chair, that's where the space sort of starts to make more sense. And when you're walking through it, it's very orderly and very basic, very systematic in a way. The rooms and their needs and their originally Yassi Vafai and then Eric Rosen were the people who worked on this project with me, and I want to thank them. When you ask someone to build a wall which is curving and tilting at the same time, the first response is a big laugh. It was a very painful project because, again, it's a very complicated project in terms of all the things other than the spatial problems, which is the plumbing. It requires various extra systems for the different gases and kind of water they use, and so it's all the equipment they use and the type of equipment they use, all the regulations. It's very, very complicated project. And this is I call it Maeve Sana House. It's my house, and I hope that one day I can build it. It was an experiment of, at the time I was going through a very difficult emotional time, and sort of like this house is an expression of all those things that I was going through, which none of you can tell from looking at these images, but I can feel it. And it's all recorded in that project. And finally, I think that I would like to finish this with a very good thought. I hope that we can get more in control of our system, or the system which is controlling us now. And we can be more effective in changing the things around us, not just for the sake of the benefits or the sake of profits, but for changing, not just for the sake of changing for changing for better life and change for a better world. Thank you.